In this first slide, we have the morphogenesis of the central nervous system. The point I want to make about this particular slide is to make emphasis on where it is that we find melanin, at the very beginnings of human origins, at the very beginning of the cell developing. Up top, we have, it's kind of unfocused up at the top, but we have the embryo laid out. In the middle, we have a overview, looking at the cell from the top. On the bottom, we have a cross section, and where you see the dark inner lining, that's what we're referring to as melanin, in terms of being in the neural crest, in terms of being where all of the, not all of the, but where the systems, the endocrine system, the nervous system, develop out of a place that is highly melanated in the first place. Right here on the side, we have the optic cup, which relates to where retina, where the retina is forming. Well, what is the retina for? The retina is for the visual system. So you have melanin also in that location, but it's deriving in a different place from the cranial neural tube, or the neural crest. May I have the next slide, please? So when we speak of where we find retina, it's at the back of the eye. Well, when you start talking about how it is that you are seeing, well, there's electromagnetic radiation out there. You don't actually see it. I mean, yes, you see because you see, but in terms of where is it? How can you see it? That radiation is transferred into something that the body then can pick up. That is what nerve impulses. That is, electricity needs to be generated, so the waves are then transmitted, but it's a key place where I have the word melanin on this slide here. Right at the back of the eyeball is where you have the retina, and that's where the pigmented cell layer is. So everywhere you find melanin, it is acting as a converter of energy. So it's changing that electromagnetic energy into neural impulses so that the brain can process this information. And other presentations have already talked about, again, the visual system and ear system, but I'm just trying to let you know here where it's located and emphasize that it's converting energy. And certainly then goes back to the back of the brain for processing. May I have the next slide, please? Sound. Just had an excellent presentation on sound and looking at the importance of it, and I think that this slide right here may not be the best description of the ear laid out. We've already have seen some presentations with the ear laid out, but we want to make you understand that in the inner ear, that's where you find energy conversion going on once again. How do you hear? Sound waves. You don't see the sound waves, you can't really visualize them, but they're out there. The body then must transmit that information in order to interpret it. So the conversion of those sound waves now into nerve impulses is happening in the inner ear. Outer ear, middle ear, inner ear. And it's in the inner ear where the receptors are for the nervous system to convert this energy, and that's the important point about showing this slide. However, to actually state where you find the melanin, Dr. Brown has already stated in terms of the cupula, the ampulla. I don't want to confuse you with many of those scientific terms, but the point is, again, with the ear, it's also acting as a converter of energy. May I have the next slide, please? Along with the ear, and cranial nerve 8 is the vestibulocochlear nerve. Well, it's not just hearing, but it's also the balance system, equilibrium. And we also have melanin located here, and again, this slide is just representing that for you. And understand, again, the fact that we have so much rhythm within our culture. Where does it come from? Space? Nah, it's all about how our bodies are constructed to deal with that. So melanin is also within the vestibular mechanisms to also convert that energy for, again, movement, coordination. Next slide, please. Besides the coordination, there is a strong emphasis on melanin within the midbrain. There's a region of the brain called the substantia nigra, where you see the word melanin, and right next to the word melanin is the substantia nigra. If it's too small for you back there, it's the second part of this section of the brain up top, where you see some dark-colored cells extending out this way. That is the substantia nigra. Substantia nigra means black substance in Latin. Substantia, substance, nigra, black. This is a very important region because of the neurodegenerative problem of Parkinson's disease. Those individuals that have Parkinson's disease have damage at the substantia nigra, which also then causes a lessening of the production of dopamine. If there's a problem with this region of the brain, individuals may show fascination, coordination problems. They have tremors. There are clear movement problems. So by looking at the brain and looking at disturbances, that's another way to backtrack and state how it is that the brain is actually functioning, how it is actually carrying out functions. So again, it's in the midbrain, and we know about movement, and we know about African people, and also listening to music and just always beating, bopping. Has something to do, again, with the brain and how our nervous systems are hooked up to the universe. Next slide, please. Now, the pineal gland, as we stated, is in the center of the brain, and I wanted to show this slide as a representation of where we see it. If the arrow is clear enough for you, it's not just inside of the brain, but it's almost sitting in some fluid. That fluid is the cerebrospinal fluid, which many presentations have already stated to you. It flows around the brain and also within certain corridors within the brain, the ventricular system. Well, the pineal gland sitting there, it's almost like floating. So when people speak of meditating and also speak of raising that crown chakra, there's a possibility that there's an erection within the pineal gland to, again, be from the stimulation of the meditation process. This all relates to the chakra system in terms of, again, spiritual centers within the body. And then the highest one being the crown chakra. And then, again, those that do meditate may have that funny feeling in the top of the head and that halo that you do see around the heads of, not the white Jesus with the long blonde hair and blue eyes, but any pictures that you may see of Jesus and there's a halo around the head, it makes reference to, again, that spiritual vision, that inner vision. The opening of, as we've heard Dr. King make reference to, the inner eye, the third eye. So I wanted to make reference to this organ and show you a anatomical description of where it is. Next slide, please. Now, the pineal gland is a very fascinating organ, but Western science states that it doesn't, well, they do not talk too much about it. I was in graduate school at Howard University and sat in a medical school class with first-year students. I was taking the course, and the white instructors told these future doctors that the pineal gland doesn't do anything, so don't worry about it, and we went on to the next topic. This is 1990. So people are still professing that this organ does not do anything. As I just stated to you within my introduction, the pineal gland produces a hormone, melatonin, and that's been known since 1958. So people do not want to know, or if they don't know, they just are not schooled properly. So what you see right here is a neural pathway from the eye to the pineal gland and the synthesis of pineal hormones. So melatonin is not actually the only one. From the eye, you have the impulses going to the suprachiasmatic nucleus in the hypothalamus. From the hypothalamus, you have tracts going to the upper thoracic cord to the intermediate lateral horn of the spinal column. So it's not down here, but the spinal column near the top of the neck. And then you have the impulses from the intermediate lateral horn then going to the superior cervical ganglion, which is part of the peripheral nervous system, which is sitting right outside of the spinal cord. From the superior cervical ganglion, you now talk to the pineal gland by way of a substance called norepinephrine, which is a neurotransmitter very important for the functioning of our nervous system. Norepinephrine is released at a particular receptor, the beta-adrenergic receptor, to now stimulate the pineal gland to do what it does. It sets up a cascading of events, and as you see at the very top of this pineal site, there's a capillary, a cut capillary. Well, from that capillary bed, you then have these substances flowing from the diet, from what you put into your body, into this particular organ. Not just this organ, but for our presentation, this organ. Tryptophan is a very important substance as a precursor molecule to start this whole cascade of events. Tryptophan, if we're talking about diet, imagine everything you put into your body is needed. We must start to value what we're doing with our bodies, because our systems depend upon natural substances. As an amino acid, tryptophan then is converted to into 5-hydroxytryptophan, and then into serotonin, the substance that the brother mentioned during the previous presentation. However, this substance serotonin within itself is powerful. It doesn't, the statement about Prozac is actually a serotonin uptake inhibitor. What Prozac is doing is increasing the amount of serotonin in the system. So those individuals that may be depressed, sad, down, it's because their serotonin levels aren't up. So you give this drug, the uptake inhibitor, to prevent it from being reuptaken into the system so it stays out there longer. So it's really to increase the amount of serotonin. Well, that's just one stage before you even get to melatonin, which we now are studying, but most people have not investigated melatonin enough to state what it really does. After serotonin, it's converted into N-acetylserotonin and into melatonin. As I stated, melatonin has something to do with lightening the skin. Well, if melatonin is being primarily released at nighttime, it makes common sense that, well, the ultraviolet radiation from the sun is not around, so the skin is lightening. The body is naturally adapting to the situation. The skin is lightening to let more radiation in to handle that vitamin D process that we will discuss next. So melatonin is the hormone of darkness, and the one we'll speak about next is the hormone of light. May I have the next slide, please? Well, before we discuss that, look at the pineal site as a photoreceptor. At the top, we're talking about fish and amphibians. Reptiles, they have a bump at the top of the head, and not most likely, that's making reference to the pineal gland sitting close to the top of the head. So when you speak of evolution and embryological development, phylogeny, people speak of these amphibians and fish, and then moving up to higher mammals and then the humans. Well, there's some transition there. You know about the stuff with Darwin. We want to get into that. But the point is that the pineal gland has been functioning as this photoreceptor in these smaller animals. Now, when you move to birds, and you see at the second part of this slide here, it's acting as a neuroendocrine transducer. So also somehow changing the energy from the light into now some substances secreted in the birds. Well, the bottom one is with mammals, such as us. Pineal site as a photoendocrine transducer. Again, changing the electromagnetic energy outside into neural pulses so that the body can understand it and interpret it. Next slide, please. So when we speak of that as the third eye, certainly it's not acting as an eye in our bodies, but there are receptors on the pineal site that look almost like the photoreceptors in the retina, in the eye. So there's a direct correlation. But people speak of it as the pineal gland as a vestigial organ. That means it doesn't do anything anymore. It doesn't. Don't worry about it. It's not the case. Whoops, upside down. Yes, you can get it if possible. Can you switch that slide? That slide was showing this process of the multi-communication interface that I want to explain to you, meaning that you have an endocrine relationship, a neuroendocrine relationship, and an endocrine neural relationship. It's the endocrine system that is very important in terms of releasing these hormones throughout the body to make certain that you function properly during the day. That's why it is important to at least put something into your body in terms of some nourishment so these organs work properly. At the very top, with the neuroendocrine transduction, you're speaking of the pineal gland releasing some substance into the endocrine system, melatonin then going to various other parts of the body to function, various parts of the body to initiate events. The second part, endocrine neural, besides melatonin then goes to another part of the body, let's say the adrenal glands, to have some influence on those steroid hormones in the adrenal gland. And just, again, in terms of hormones, if you take a teaspoon of sugar, level it off, and let's say throw it in an Olympic-sized swimming pool. That's how powerful hormones are. A minute amount of any of the hormones can have a drastic effect on behavior. So we want to kind of keep that in mind in terms of, again, speaking of endocrine system. And the bottom was just, again, showing an endocrine relationship. And we know so much about peptides today, about new chemicals that are coming out, new substances being found, that now it's hard to just attribute one function to a chemical. Nah, there are many events that go on here. May I have the next slide, please? When I stated that vitamin D is a misnomer, it's really should be called sotriol. It's another name looked at as a steroid hormone. What you have here on the slide, and it's light in color, may be difficult for you to see, but those X's that are on the brain are audio-radiographic sites where sotriol is actually found in terms of in the brain. And I want to run through this. If you can't see it, I'll read it to you. But at the very top, where I have two X's, and it says neocortex in small letters, above the neocortex, I have placed intellect and creativity. So by sotriol, again, getting that radiation, that absorption from the sun, definitely has an effect on your thought processes. So intellect and creativity are involved. The next X, I'm going to go around clockwise. In the middle, reticular activating system. Alertness, getting people to react, respond. That's how that part of the brain, that's what that part of the brain is responsible for. Making the system alert so the individual now knows how to deal with stress, respond to stress. And speaking of the stress situation and these hormones that I'm talking about, there's a new program on TV called Mantis. Anybody happen to see Mantis 2 weeks ago? They had a program on these young people taking this drug called ACTH3. Anybody see that? Well, that's very significant. ACTH, as has already been stated in other presentations, adrenocorticotropic stimulating hormone. This substance comes from the adrenal gland. There's a cascading event. From the hypothalamus, corticotropic releasing hormone is released to talk to the pituitary gland to release ACTH to go to the adrenal glands to kick in your steroid hormones. It's the stress response. In that particular program, they were talking about, let's feel the rage. So these people, and they've got to understand about what they do with these drugs. They are now on Prozac trips. As I told you about the serotonin stuff. People are now making parties out of it. And as Brother Africa stated at the first presentation today, it's poison you're putting in your system. You have the natural, you have everything in your body needed to actually carry these things out. We want to keep that point in mind. So this alertness is very important for you responding to, the world. Coordination, cerebellum, Golgi cells. We know about coordination. Again, the cerebellum is focused on fine coordination movement, not the gross movements, but fine coordination movements. Sotriol is also found in the substantia gelatinosa, pain sensitivity, extrasensory perception, feelings. We got it. We have those expressions. Motor neurons, reflexes. You know how you got to respond to certain situations. You got to move. You have to make a move. Dorsal raphe nucleus. That's where serotonin is primarily. The raphe nucleus is where serotonin is primarily produced, and that has an effect on mood. The hippocampus. Memory. Very important structure for memory. Sotriol is also found there. The pituitary gland. Again, hormone release. Amygdala and the stria terminalis of the bed nucleus, also involved with emotions. And then you have at the very top the striatum, complex movements. The striatum is part of the connection between the not caudate nucleus, but the substantia nigra we mentioned earlier. There's a tract for those that may be heavily involved in neurology, you know about the substantia nigra and the caudate nucleus talking to one another. It's the nigrostriatal pathway. So this is a very important place for this sotriol to function. And again, we're talking about movement, rhythm. So all these things, movement, rhythm, emotions, relate again to this spiritual material connection that we can now see scientifically with all the terms that I explained to you this morning. I wish we had time for question and answers at this point, but I'll say hopefully we can have those after the presentation this morning. We can discuss those things. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Brother Moore.